Well, the desperate situation in Gaza continues. Hostages not being released anymore for now, hopefully just for now. And the people of Gaza themselves trying to find safety as the Israeli army, the IDF, continues this latest offensive there. Lieutenant General Sir Simon Mayall joins me. Good afternoon to you. Evacuation orders now covering most of Rafah. The people there have been told to leave, indicating that the IDF could soon launch another major operation, including a ground operation potentially.
Yes, and I think there's every chance they will. It's tied up, of course, in the fact that Hamas are still holding hostages. It's tied up in, undoubtedly, Netanyahu's own domestic politics, but the hardline Israeli intent to destroy Hamas certainly as a military capability. Of course, it's been emboldened by, I suppose, Trump and a really changed situation in the region, with Hezbollah on the back foot, Iran weakened, and of course a new government in Syria. So I think from a human point of view, it's a real tragedy, but there are a number of factors that are, I'm afraid, feeding into this.
You mentioned Iran and Hezbollah. Do you think there's an element here where Netanyahu is looking at the situation and thinking Hamas have never been weaker politically, let alone militarily, never been weaker politically? So far, any words of support are just words for Hamas from the likes of Hezbollah, where previously it would have been more than that.
Oh, very much so. But it's interesting who's supporting Hamas, Sheila. And again, you've reported on this very comprehensively over, since the 7th of October. The reality, of course, is Hamas are an Iranian-backed Shia militia, technically with nothing in common with a Sunni Arab militia, which is Hamas. Egypt are really keen for Hamas to be destroyed, Jordan the same, most of the Gulf monarchies, and of course Fatah and the Palestinian Authority. So the awful thing is the Palestinians been, really between the original rock and a hard place. A Hamas that understands its survival is at stake, and an Israeli Defense Force that has to come through them to get at Hamas. So it's a very, very sad, tragic situation for the Palestinians. And it's very interesting to have seen at last, and long overdue in many ways, the Palestinians beginning to put the blame quite squarely on their situation back on Hamas, who they believe are holding them hostage, frankly, and leaving them vulnerable.
And yet you can see how, for fear, they haven't done it or hadn't done it up until this point. They've done it previously, prior to October the 7th, the population of Gaza, haven't they? And attempted to, I was reading at the weekend, about taxes and how they how they run the law rather than this situation.
Yeah. And of course, Sheila, they are very aware of all that money that was siphoned in. Now, again, there's a slightly murky story about why Netanyahu allowed it, but so much of that money that was given really for the good of the Palestinian people, of course, was diverted to for either into the coffers of Hamas or to build that extraordinary underground tunnel system.
And when you think of our own experience, different obviously, but some similarities. When you think of our own experience in the Second World War, cities that were bombed by the Luftwaffe. Eventually, proper public protection was put in place. People going down into air raid shelters, into tube stations and the like. But to think of that underground network in Gaza and the sheer scale of civilian casualties above ground is it's an abomination on every front, isn't it?
It is. And they were not used. They were not built for the safety and security of the Palestinian people. They were built for Hamas to continue to conduct its operations for war. This is the absolute tragedy of that region. And you can keep scrolling back, Sheila, but again, it is extremely complex. And unfortunately, of course, the baton of mutual antipathy is passed from generation to generation, and that's the real tragedy. And I served in Northern Ireland, as many of my colleagues did, and we saw how these things just keep going on, and trying to break this cycle to say. Yeah. There is a real future in that part of the world. It's technically has wealth. It's got fantastically talented people who could be doing so much more, other than channeling this energy into violence.
And
that's not attributing blame.
We've seen prior to this war, we've seen much briefer wars between Israel and the Palestinians. and in Gaza in particular. But this has been so long and so brutal and so deadly, and the hostages are still there, many of them,
Yep.
and the civilians above ground are still dying. What do you think it will take for that exhaustion that everybody must be feeling to really make a difference? I mean, there was hope, there was a sort of a spark of that in those recent protests, wasn't there? But again, a couple of the notable people in those protests, we are told, have been tortured and killed. So that will send a strong message to those who might think about coming out again. And that's the whole point of killing them. But you have to wonder what the heck it will take for any turning point to be reached here.
Well, the tragedy is, of course, you have the state of Israel on one side, and people can be critical, but it is a democracy. It has its, the freedom of press, etc. And you do have a terrorist organisation. So you're not talking state on state where you can come with a ceasefire, an armistice, and a peace. Difficult enough. Ukraine, Russia. Of course, Hamas know in their heart of hearts that when they do hand back the hostages, which hopefully they will, then to be honest with you, it's fair game on them. Mm-hmm. They will have no protection, and you've only got to see the film Munich to know how long and how patient the Israeli security forces will be with the Hamas leadership. Anyone associated with the 7th of October. So there's another sort of tragedy that the hostages are part of a survival game for the Hamas leadership. And equally, of course, we do know the violence in Gaza will feed that narrative that will get the next generation of young people to sign up to Hamas, whoever follows them.
And you talk
what
there.
What is interesting, of course, is at least the commitment in Egypt and Jordan and the Gulf states for the reconstruction in due course. But even they will say Hamas have no place in the reconstruction of Gaza, and they have the money, and they would have the time to do differently from the so-called Trump plan.
But we've seen with other Islamist groups, they're a difficult thing to stamp out. They'll re-emerge with another name, even potentially. But it's because it's a set of ideas as much as anything, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You mentioned there about the democracy that is Israel. I mean, again, separate to this. Well, it's connected, obviously, but separate to these invasion plans that we suspect are underway. Netanyahu's moves on the Supreme Court in Israel and his moves against the leader of the Shin Bet domestic security agency, they're really stretching the term democracy, aren't they?
They are. And Netanyahu leads a government of real hardliners, as you well know, Sheila, and you have reported it. And there was a huge amount of dislike and animosity towards Netanyahu, who does hide behind the fact that he's a war leader at the moment. And of course, it's very difficult, as it is for Palestinians in Gaza, to be seen you're giving succor to the enemy by opposing your leader in the middle of a war. But it's interesting, the latest thing with Netanyahu, of course, is the Qatar money that flooded in through Israel into Gaza, which was, then used in some ways as a wedge between the two elements of
how close he was to
Palestinian
it.
people.
Yeah, how close he was to that flow.
So there's real
which is why he's getting rid of the head of Shin Bet. I think that seems to be the.
I know, and people are really, really worried about this,
yes,
about the subvention of that democracy, which many of us do hold up in very much in Israel's favour, given the neighbourhood they're in.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Lieutenant General Sir Simon Mayall, former Deputy Chief of the Defence Staff and former Senior Middle East Advisor at the Ministry of Defence.